Right, thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Well, welcome back. My name is Magnus Nielsen, Lord Londonstone, and I have my YouTube channel, as you can see for yourselves. And I'm back right now in the heart of London, and if I turn this video around, you will see that I'm looking at Westminster Abbey, which I've already covered, and also the Houses of Parliament, which I've also covered recently. So what I want to do now is I want to move on from here just to explore the parts of Westminster around the House of Parliament. So what I'm doing is I'm heading off. I'm in Parliament Square at the present moment, and I'm heading westbound. And if I were to continue for long enough, I'd eventually come to Buckingham Palace. Now, at some time in the future, I want to cover Buckingham Palace. I won't do it today because frankly, I don't have the time, but what I want to do is try and get onto the side streets of Westminster as soon as I can. So when I turn round here, you can see, or maybe you can't, you should be able to.
This side.
Well, it's not a very good view actually. It's Lord Palmerston, Henry Temple, Lord Palmerston. Oh, now it's obscured by that coach. He's got his back to us, so that's not much use to us, is it? So we'll move on. At the present moment, we're just going along beside the old Treasury building. And this old Treasury building was designed by Sir Charles Barry. And I think I've said this before, but it's worth saying again. He was the same man who designed the Houses of Parliament. So it just shows you how versatile he was in the different sorts of styles of architecture that he could produce. Now, the Treasury was the place, or the department of government, which was really responsible for the entire management of our civil service, so it was a very important department. And it's now moved. I'm not actually quite certain where it's moved to. I'll have to go and do that research. At the present moment, the building is occupied by the Department for Media, Culture and Sport. Now what I'm doing is I'm heading towards St James's Park, which is the, if you like to think of it, as the front garden of Buckingham Palace. But I shan't really be going into St James's Park. Again, I'll try and cut, there's a lot in St James's Park to show you, but I'll do that on another occasion. I just want to stick with what I've organised for myself today. Just to give you an idea what it's like to live in London or to visit London, and I just want to walk around and show you just raw footage of people in the street. Give you an idea yourself, if you're thinking of visiting London, where to visit and what sort of things you can expect. Today is the 29th of September 2025. It's Michaelmas Day. It's really the first day of autumn, but it's a glorious summer, last day of summer, as it were, or the beginning of autumn. So I thought I'd take full advantage of the opportunity to come out here. London has experienced something of a fall in tourism in my estimation. Not getting quite as many American tourists as there used to be, and I think that's largely on account of the fact that our Mayor of London, Mr. Sadiq Khan, or Sir Sadiq Khan, I'm sorry, I should refer to him, has a long-standing argument with President Donald Trump, and he started a war which he can't finish by making a number of insulting remarks about him, which are really not his business because he's not an American. And as a result, Donald Trump has made many insulting remarks about him, saying that he's an appalling mayor, and he's also pointing to the rise in knife crime in London. Now the sad thing about Donald Trump's comments is that they're not entirely false. I can say, however, that the violent crime that we do experience in London, and you need to be told about this, is more confined to the outer suburbs than the central suburbs, and certainly the great tourist district. So actually I'd say, well, coming down here now, what I'm doing is I'm coming into, can you see that, Old Queen Street? And while we just stop off here, we'll go and have a look at this little restaurant, or calls itself the, well, what does it call itself? Great Queen Street Cafe, I think. Old Queen Street Cafe, that's what it calls itself. Old Queen Street Cafe. And I only look at this place because you can see it through the window. It really looks quite nice actually. I haven't been inside, but I'm very impressed with it. What have they got? Snacks. Well, they do bread and butter for £6 5 or pumpkin seed hummus, house pickled crudités and curry, and that is for £8. Then going further down, starters, you could have fried cod's cheeks for £13.50. You could have Isle of Wight tomato tart fan, basil ricotta, red onions and black seed olive salsa, and that's for £12. So that just gives you some idea of the sort of things which this place serves. I only point this out because I was very disappointed when the restaurant in Methodist Central Hall closed down. It was a very useful place to tell people and to recommend, because like the Methodists, they're all very plain, straightforward people, and they don't overcharge. I wouldn't say it was an inspiring place to eat, but it was a good place to know about, but unfortunately it's closed, so that's an alternative there. Old Queen Street Cafe. As I walk down here, what I want to do is get a sight of the front of Westminster Abbey, again just so you know exactly where we're located. And coming down here, just here on the right, we have a pub called the Westminster Arms. The Westminster Arms. I'll tell you about this because this is the sort of pub which gets frequently patronised by members of Parliament and other people who work in Parliament. So this is one of these places which is worth knowing about, and it's had all sorts of interesting patrons in the past. It's had Bill Clinton, Angelina Jolie and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So that just goes to show you. Now Methodist Central Hall is directly in front of me, but I'm not going to go all the way up to Methodist Central Hall. Matthew Parker Street. Matthew Parker was an archbishop in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, who made it his job to inspect ordinary citizens for their religious views, and he was very much resented for that, and he was called Nosy Parker as a result. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen, the west front of Westminster Abbey. But we're not going there. As I say, we've been there already. I've covered all that stuff, and if you want it, it's on the channel. In fact, I've covered it in some detail, and there are several videos about it. But what I want to do is move on and show you one of the side streets around here. So we come back by the Westminster Arms, and we'll cut into Lewisham Street, which is this little side alleyway, really. It's not a street, it's an alleyway. Here we are. Lewisham Street. This is Lewisham Street. No traffic. Well, that's one of the recommendations, I suppose. Otherwise, there's not very much else to recommend it. It's nothing of any great cultural or historical importance happened in this place. Lewisham is it's a borough. in Greater London. It's on the south side of the Thames. It's not very far from Greenwich or Deptford. And as I'm talking to you now, it begins to dawn upon me that although I'm a born Londoner, born 76 years ago and lived in this city most of my life, I can't really recall ever having visited Lewisham. I think I did once. I think that was in 1998. But on consideration, that might have been New Cross rather than Lewisham, so I'm not entirely sure. Is there anything of any great historical or cultural significance in Lewisham? Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. I'm sure there is, though. I'll just have to go off and do some research, so let's just stick with one thing at a time, shall we? We're making our way to the end of this alleyway, and I'll be able to show you the street that is really directly in front of us in just a moment. But even so, there are one or two things of interest around here. This is rather what London is like. If you visit London, you'll find yourself wandering around the streets haphazardly. You just stumble upon things which are really very interesting, which you wouldn't expect necessarily to find, and they may not mean a great deal to you. So this is again one of the reasons why I do this channel, so to give you a clear idea of what there is to see and do while you're here, and just want to take advantage of this gloriously sunny day. Now here, let's just step back a bit from the pavement. I don't think I'm going to get knocked down. We have a pub here called the Two Chairmen. Right, and this pub goes back to the 1729. And again, it's one of these pubs which is used fairly frequently by members of Parliament and people who work in Parliament. Just read what it says. Established actually before 1729, the Two Chairmen is said to be named after the two men who used to carry imperial sedan chairs for wealthy patrons who visited the pub. And the Royal Cockpit, the infamous cockfighting theatre next door. Back in the day, it was seen as a fast and efficient way of traversing the streets of London without dirtying one's feet. Well, now then, turn round here. That is Cockpit Steps, and that would take you down to the cockpit. The cockpit was a place where people would come here in the 17th and 18th century to gamble on the prize fights between two cocks. It was a blood sport, and it was eventually abolished, banned in 1835. That's because the national temperament of the British was changing. We used to enjoy things like animals fighting each other, but more or less throughout the 19th century and right into the 20th, and I suppose also into the 21st, we've become affectionate towards animals. You have things like the Royal Society for the Protection of Animals, and that's a very, very British institution. Right, Queen Anne's Gate. Actually, now this used to be, once upon a time, two streets which were knocked together in 1873. And you'll see here, it's got lots and lots of blue plucks, the blue pluck system, which is something you find in London to show you that somebody of some very great distinction lived here at one time. Viscount Grey of Flodden, Sir Edward Grey, 1862 to 1933, Foreign Secretary, lived here. Okay, now he was the Foreign Secretary after the First World War, so it would be sort of early 1920s. It was also him who was the man who drew up the Sykes-Picot line in between Jordan and Syria. That's probably not something he's going to be terribly popular for somehow. Here, Charles Townley, for example. Charles Townley He was a collector of Greek and Roman antiquities, many of which are in the British Museum. Here we have another house. Here, this is number 16, and we have blue plaques which are dedicated. Let's just have a quick look at them. William Smith, he was a member of Parliament. He was actually the grandfather of Florence Nightingale. He was very much involved as an abolitionist for the abolition of the slave trade. Lord Fisher, otherwise known as Jackie Fisher, John Fisher, Admiral of the Fleet, a great innovator and one of the great architects of naval reform prior to the First World War. So he would have been a man who had been responsible for the British victory in the First World War. Okay, so let's move on. We've got here number 5, 7, 9. Here you can't really see it because they've put up scaffolding. Was the home of Lord Palmerston, Henry Temple. Now he was the man whose statue is in Parliament Square with his back to us. You can't really see it. No doubt it will come down at some time, but Lord Palmerston was the man who was Foreign Secretary from 1835 to his death in 1865. No, let me just rephrase that. He was Foreign Secretary 1835. He became Prime Minister in 1855 and remained Prime Minister for the next 10 years, except for a small break. And he was very much responsible for British foreign policy at a time when Britain was the dominant power in the world. This is why he's so important. And his idea about diplomacy was to send a gunboat to any country which didn't agree with the British way of doing things. Okay, number 5, number 7, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is number 9. And that was once the home of a man called Henry Hindman. And Henry Hindman lived in the late Victorian period, and he was converted to the ideas of Karl Marx. And in fact, he did a great deal to propagate the ideas of Karl Marx. And he founded the Social Democratic Federation, which eventually became part of the Labour Party that we know today. Apart from being a Marxist, he was also a very great anti-Semite. Once upon a time, that sort of thing was respectable. It's not today, I might add. I think the less we say about him, the better. So we'll just make our way down here. And as we do so, you'll see here, over on the left-hand side, we've got a statue of Queen Anne, Anna Regina. That's a very flattering statue of Queen Anne. She didn't look like that at all. She was morbidly obese. Queen Anne was born in 1665. In 1684, she married Prince George of Denmark. And then, after that, she was pretty well permanently pregnant up until the year 1700. She had 18 pregnancies, mostly stillbirths. She had one child, actually, who survived the experience of being born from this mother. But he died when he was 11 years old. That was the Duke of Gloucester. And Queen Anne was the last of the Stuart monarchs. So after she died in 1714, we had the Hanoverians came in. That was George I, who was her third cousin. The problem with Anne, as I say, she lived a really very unhappy life, and she just used to console her misery by stuffing food into her throat over and over again. She must have consumed something like 5,000 calories a day, so it was really just impossible at the end. I mean, she was just not in any good shape at all. Towards the end of her life, they had to sort of wheel her around on a trolley, which is okay if you're on a single floor, but when you actually want to travel between floors, they had to cut a hole in the floor and sort of winch her down from one floor to the other, or winch her up, as the case may be, through the ceiling. When she died, they had to bury her in a square coffin. Anyway, here we have, continuing on, this is, or used to be, Queen's Square. And you can see there's this excellent arrangement of houses dating from 1704. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that was the year in which John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, won the Battle of Blenheim. It was also the year in which the British Navy was able to seize and maintain their hold over Gibraltar, and as we've had Gibraltar ever since. But this just shows you the great change in the architecture of a period. So this is really called the Queen Anne style, and you can see this is of course an innovation at the time. Prior to this they were building houses of timber and timber houses with mud walls, really, mud wattle and daub. But here, after the Great Fire of 1666, they took their inspiration from the Dutch. We had a Dutch king in William III, and so they incorporated a number of Dutch styles. And this is the Dutch influence on English architecture of that particular period, the late 17th and early 18th century. Turning around here, Lord Haldane, statesman, lawyer and philosopher, after whom the Haldane Society is named. That's a society for left-wing lawyers. He was, as I say, statesman, lawyer and philosopher. He was also Minister of Defence, and as Minister of Defence he set up the Territorial Army, a volunteer army. So this is just walking down here just to give you an impression of what it's like to walk through a quiet street off the main streets in London. The sort of thing you find quite by accident, and if you like this sort of thing, if you're interested in architecture, it sort of takes the breath away. But many of the houses around here, as I say, because it's so close to Parliament, are associated with Parliament. And you have a number of public bodies here who have their offices. And one of these, directly in front of us, this is the institution known as the National Trust. Now, the National Trust was a body that was set up in 1895 by a lady called Octavia Hill, who was very concerned at the time with a number of houses that were being put onto the market that were subsequently being demolished, and some of these houses went back many hundreds of years, and she thought it was very important to conserve heritage. Nowadays they have something like 500 properties, and what you can do is you can join the National Trust and you can go off and see them at a discount. Of course, if you can go see them, you don't have to join the National Trust, but then you have to pay the full value in order to have a look at their properties. So just taking a bit further down here now, you'll see directly opposite the entrance to the National Trust, here we have number 40, and it's at number 40 a house that was once owned by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, and a lease was taken out by James Mill and also his son John Stuart Mill, both philosophers, very famous philosophers of the Victorian period. So this is where they lived. John Stuart Mill was famous, as I say, for his works on the subject of logic. Okay, so now moving down here, and what we're doing is just coming off old Queen Anne's Gate. Just down the street a little way. Department of Public Prosecutions used to be located here. It doesn't say any notice on the door, so I don't know whether that is still true. This large ugly building here. Talk about architecture in London. I mean, we have examples of the good and the bad and the ugly, and I'm afraid this is one of the ugly examples. This is the Home Office, Ministry of Justice, Crown Prosecution Service, yes, Attorney General's Office. Right. The large building in front of me is number 55 Broadway, which is famous for the organisation of London transport. That's the underground station, the undergrounds and the buses. We've got another pub down here called the Old Star. So again, you might like to consider that as an alternative to the Methodist Central Hall. The Methodists, of course, don't serve alcohol, but these places do, so that might be worth noting. Oh, let's see what they've got down here. There's a map. This is always interesting to have a look at the maps. So we've come down here. You can see the Ministry of Justice over on our right hand side, and we'll go round here. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. I think I'll wrap up here, at least for the time being. Across the street you have, this is Petit France, which should really be known as Petite France. This is where you had a lot of French people lived. I think probably French Huguenots. In the period from the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. Look, what I'll do now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, is just turn by. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you've enjoyed this. I enjoy making these. I just hope that some people are actually watching them and benefiting from them, but I'll carry on. And it would be nice to have comments. It's always nice to have likes, or even dislikes, to show at least you know that you've actually been watching it. So comments, likes, shares, subscribe. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. I will continue from here, but not just now. I think that I've done quite enough for one day. And I'll just for the time being, what I'll do is I will say over and out.